Hello, my name is Jessie Ray, and not only am I a social worker in the You Matter program at Century College, but I'm also a veteran. And as a veteran, I have seen firsthand what deployments can do to service members and their families. I spent a lot of time with soldiers in crisis during my deployments, and even more time with them after we returned. These experiences were difficult and did not always end well, but it gave me motivation to continue to help my fellow veterans when they return from war. And I'm proud that I continue to serve current military members, veterans, and their families in a professional capacity. Through my experiences, both as a veteran and a social worker, I realized that thoughts of suicide can be very real and very frequent occurrences for some veterans. According to the Veterans Administration, around 20% of all suicides in the United States are completed by veterans. In fact, the most recent data from the Veterans Administration speculates that we lose 22 veterans a day to suicide. A report issued in the spring of 2010 found that as many as 950 suicide attempts occur each month among veterans receiving services through the VA. These military suicide rates are the highest they have been in 10 years. And while there are many risk factors and warning signs for suicide that veterans have in common with the general public, there are a few that are specific to service members and veterans alike. This video will focus on the risk factors and warning signs specific to veterans, along with veteran-focused resources that you can use to save a life. There are currently over 2 million veterans in the United States, and we hear about veteran support groups and welcome them home with billboards and t-shirts and bumper stickers. And this support is needed and it helps in its own way. But what about the veterans that need more help? Risk factors are the tangible things that happen in people's lives. They're the things that stack up on top of each other that make somebody think their only way out is to die by suicide. And although everybody in the population has risk factors in their lives, there are some that are more specific to veterans. One of these that's more specific to veterans is the loss of a social support. People join the military for many different reasons, and sometimes they join the military to get out of whatever situation they were in, and they never had a social support prior to joining. Once they join the military, they may go on a deployment and then come back and either not be with their unit anymore or get out of the military completely. If a person didn't have a social support prior to joining the military, it could be very hard for them to build a social support again. I myself experienced this, being in the National Guard. I went on my deployment to Iraq, and I couldn't wait to come home and see my family and my friends, and they were planning a party for me. But once I got back, I realized that I couldn't lean on them the way that I could my friends that I had made in the military. It was harder for me to explain to my friends and family that I had to sit in a bunker and was taking on mortars than it was for me to actually sit in that bunker and play cards with my friends. Not having a social support can leave a person in a very lonely and desolate place, and that's something that veterans feel on a regular basis when they return. There's also the idea of loss of relationships, be it through death or divorce. That can be very difficult. Many people have one or two very close friends or family members, and if those relationships are rocky, then that person is also rocky and is at a higher risk for dying by suicide. Another risk factor for veterans is a loss or lack of employment. And although veteran unemployment rates are getting better, it's still difficult for some veterans to find a job. Here in the United States, we often judge a person by what they do. It is very common for us to ask somebody, "What do you do?" when we first meet them. And if somebody doesn't have a job or doesn't have a response for that, they can feel very alone. They can feel like they don't have an identity, and it can be a very hopeless feeling. Another risk factor for veterans is experience with death or dying. When you're overseas, you're used to knowing that this could be your last day. And though that sounds very morbid and may seem extreme, it's a natural feeling that you have. And so when veterans return and they can't find a job and they're having difficulty with their relationships and they're isolating or sitting in their basement, they may think, well, I was used to sitting with death before, I will sit with it again. Maybe they've lost a loved one or a battle buddy when they were deployed. It can be very difficult for them to sit with that guilt sometimes, sit with that loss, and not go through that grief process in a healthy way. Lastly, a big risk factor for veterans is an increased use of alcohol and/or drugs. Many times when veterans return from deployment, they want to go out with their friends to have a drink or two and talk about their experiences or the things that have changed. But veterans aren't used to having alcohol in their system after coming back from a deployment, and that can be very difficult. Many times when a person is drinking, they lose their inhibitions. If they're struggling in other ways or have other risk factors that are stacking up, they may become ambivalent to whether they want to live or die, and alcohol may push them on one end of the fence or the other. Other risk factors may include financial issues, serious health issues, a history of abuse, or previous suicide attempts. It's important to remember, however, that every veteran is going to be different, and the risk factors are going to look different in every veteran. It's up to you to be able to identify those and ask them the question. Once you have identified that a veteran has risk factors that may be affecting their life, you want to start looking for warning signs. And warning signs are very individual. They can be verbal or they can be signs of expression, they can be behavioral. One of the warning signs that we see a lot in veterans is isolation. And many times, veterans need some time to create their new normal when they come back from a deployment. And it's all right for them to be by themselves. But when this isolation is also paired with co-occurring depression, moodiness, hopelessness, or maybe some unexplained anger, aggression, and irritability, you should look at it as a warning sign. There could be an increased use of alcohol or drugs. Also, a veteran acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills should be a warning sign. Many times veterans will come back and want a gun because they feel more safe after spending 12 months or 2 years with a weapon on their back. But when you know that there are other risk factors involved, that's when you should start asking questions and really paying attention to that veteran. Another warning sign may be putting personal affairs in order or giving away possessions. Many times we think of warning signs as somebody who is very sad, somebody who is down in the dumps, and that is true for the most part. But there's also a warning sign of veterans calling people and telling them how much they mean to them and how much they care about that person. And that feels great, and it would be nice if that was just something that people did, but unfortunately that can be a warning sign that somebody is thinking of taking their own life. Other warning signs may include feeling anxious, agitated, or unable to sleep, changes in a veteran's appearance or their personal hygiene. A veteran may express feelings of excessive guilt or shame or talk about death or dying. There may be feelings of failure or decreased performance, or feeling that life isn't worth living and having no sense of purpose in life. A veteran may also talk about feeling trapped, like there's no way out of a situation. Any of these should be warning signs for you to ask a veteran what's going on and if there's any way that you can help. So you may be concerned about a veteran and you might ask yourself, well, I don't even know what to say. How to start a conversation about suicide can seem very scary and very daunting if you've never dealt with it before. Believe me, it can be difficult. But there are certain things to remember when you start the conversation. Number one, remember that silence is a form of communication. Many times we don't say anything about suicide because we don't want to be the ones to push them over the edge, but this is not true. The majority of the time when you ask someone about suicide and use those words, it will come as a relief. Many times people are ashamed of their thoughts of suicide and they don't want to tell anybody because as a veteran you're supposed to be able to take care of everything yourself. But you can't stop thinking about suicide, and it can be a very lonely place to sit with those thoughts. Also, tell the person that you're concerned about them. If you want to ask about suicide, how you ask that question is in direct relation to how you will be able to help that person. Let them know you care. Let them know you've listened to some training videos. Let them know you have resources. That's very important. Lastly, tell the person why you're asking. Many times in our society, we ask flippantly, how are you today? Or have a good day, and there doesn't seem to be a lot behind it. If you're going to ask somebody if they're thinking about suicide, make sure you let them know why you're asking. Let them know that you're paying attention to their life. You've noticed that they don't have a job. You've noticed that they're having a hard time in their relationships. And you know that they just came back or had a difficult time on their deployment many years ago that maybe they haven't dealt with. It's really important to make a person understand that you're there because you care, not because you have to be. Also, don't forget to have your resources handy. There will be resources available at the end of this video. So what exactly do you say to somebody who may be thinking about suicide? Well, it's important to use the word suicide or taking your own life. Ask questions like, are you having thoughts of suicide? Have you been thinking about suicide? Or are you having thoughts about killing yourself? That seems very aggressive, and it can seem quite abrasive when you're talking to somebody. And I'm not suggesting that you start with those questions, but it's important that you get there, that you make it black and white. If you ask somebody, do you wish you weren't here anymore? That may be interpreted as they wish that they were at home and in bed. But if you say, are you having thoughts about suicide? They know exactly what you're talking about. And you're saying the word suicide first, so they don't have to, if they are experiencing that shame or that guilt or uncomfortableness about it. You want to make sure that you're meeting people where they are, that you're not looking down on them, and that you're not holding them up. Speaking of not looking down, there are things that we should not say when we're asking somebody about their suicidal thoughts. The first is, well, you're not going to do something stupid, are you? And although it may sound stupid to us, it's not stupid to that person. They may have tried to do things to fix their situations. They may have called all of the resources that they know, and they feel that they are at the bottom of their barrel. So it's not stupid to them. And by saying that it's stupid, we're just putting one more judgment on them. Again, don't say, well, now you would never kill yourself, would you? Remember that how we ask about suicide is in direct relation to how we will be able to help. So you've identified the risk factors, you have read the warning signs, you know that there aren't very many protective factors, if any at all, left in this veteran's life, and you get to the point where you're ready to ask the question. You tell them why you're asking, you tell them that you care, and you ask, black and white, are you thinking about suicide? There's one answer or another answer. It's either yes or no. If the veteran answers no, let them know that you care and let them know again why you asked. Make sure that you can give resources. Sometimes they just need to talk it out and they're not really thinking about suicide. They just say things flippantly like, I wish I were dead. Let them know that when they say things like that, you will take it seriously every time. Also get others involved. Even if the person has said no, they may be telling the truth. Maybe they're not thinking of suicide. But it would be good for other people to know that you're concerned. And that doesn't mean to tell everybody in that person's life. It just means find the right people in their life and ask them if they're concerned as well. And that if they ever start having suicidal thoughts or do want to talk about suicide, that you're there and you're ready to listen. If you ask the veteran, are you thinking of suicide? And the answer is yes, let them know that you care and ask them if they have a plan. There's a broad spectrum of suicide, and on one side there are people who just think about it and can't stop thinking about it, and they're frustrated with that. And on the other side of the spectrum, there are people who have a plan. They have a time and a date and a way that they want to end their life. And it's good to know where they fall on that spectrum. If the answer is yes, no matter where they are on that spectrum, whether they have a plan or not, stay with that veteran. Don't leave them alone. Ask them if you can bring them to help, be it a counseling center, be it an ER, be it a mental health provider that they already have established a relationship with. Stay with that veteran. If they're not willing to go with you, bring help to them. Call in a counselor from school or call the VA. You can also call the crisis number and sit there with them while they talk to the person on the other end. If they don't want to do that, you can always call 911. You do not want to leave that veteran alone, and you want to bring them help as soon as possible. Make sure you get other professionals involved. Many times they will say, please don't tell anybody, but they've told you for a reason, and they want help. There are many resources that you can have on hand and you can know about when you're helping a veteran. The first is the Veterans Crisis Line. The number is 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. When you call the number, they'll ask you to press 1 if you're a veteran or a loved one calling about a veteran. And that's something important to remember. You can always call a crisis line if you're concerned about someone else, and they will help you and walk you through it and give you more resources for your area. You yourself don't have to be in crisis to call this line. The Veterans Crisis Line also has a chat. You can find it at veteranscrisisline.net, or you can text 838-255 and talk to someone via text. The VA hospitals will always take a veteran, whether they're registered or not. You can walk into any ER or community-based outreach clinic, of which there are 12 in the state of Minnesota. Vet centers are staffed by combat veterans, and they are confidential to the VA hospitals, meaning you can go in and talk to somebody at a vet center, and they cannot share that information with a VA hospital. There's also the Veterans Resource Center here on Century Campus. Almost every college has a Veterans Resource Center, and it would be good to familiarize yourself with it. There are many other programs available to veterans and their loved ones. They include the Wounded Warrior Project, Coaching into Care, Survivor Outreach Services, and many more. Overall, remember that every veteran is unique and has their own unique set of coping skills. If you're concerned about a veteran, the best thing you can do is ask, inquire, and let them know you care. Always make sure you have your resources handy. Put them in your phone, keep them in your pocket, because you never know who you're going to run across or when a crisis may happen. Thank you so much for caring about our country's veterans.